Rick Dalton and Cliff Booth are great characters who embody a sort of American masculinity that used to exist but ended around the same time the golden age of Hollywood did. It's entertaining to just see these characters hang out together, to see Cliff Booth drive around Los Angeles and then feed his dog food. In this way, I think that Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is, in some respects, a very conservative movie. It's a movie that celebrates the lost American culture that existed before the late 1960s counterculture destroyed it. Hello everyone. Recently I was asked if I could provide an example from our contemporary society of something that I felt had actual legitimate artistic merit to it. That's a pretty hard thing to do given that I don't think the United States has a culture. Instead we have an anti-culture. It's very hard, for example, to describe the culture of the United States. I do think there were two films that came out last year that are nonetheless worthy of a recommendation. One of those is the movie Joker, which I already did a video on, so I won't talk about much here. But the other movie I would recommend is Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Both of these movies are similar in that I believe they both have a lot of artistic merit. They're both very violent movies, and they both have a lot of social commentary in them. Joker was definitely the more controversial movie. I believe it was treated pretty unfairly by all the movie reviewers who ended up revealing their political bias through the review score of that movie. However, in a lot of ways, I feel like the social commentary in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is even more biting than that of Joker. Yet Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was well reviewed and didn't seem to court any sort of controversy. Maybe it just went over people's heads because it was directed by Quentin Tarantino. Now, I can't say I'm a big fan of Quentin Tarantino. He's a massive social justice warrior, and I feel that he ruins a lot of his movies or makes them worse off by being overly self-indulgent. Now, that being said, while a lot of times I don't like his movies overall, and a lot of them, including Pulp Fiction, Django Unchained, Inglourious Bastards, the movies themselves have issues, but there are certain scenes in each of those movies that are absolutely amazingly done. In my view, Quentin Tarantino is the type of film director who doesn't always get things right, but he's very talented and he's very passionate about the movies that he makes, and that shows. So why did I like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood? Well, the movie is a celebration of the end of Hollywood's golden age. The time period between 1910 and the late 60s tends to be regarded as the golden age of Hollywood. That golden age ended with the hippie counterculture. Many believe, and myself included, that it was during this period of time that Hollywood created and released its greatest movies. This was a period of time where American movies were made for Americans and reflected American culture, before it was destroyed and replaced with the contemporary anti-culture. It was during this period where movies relied on practical special effects. No computer CGI nonsense. Good acting was highly valued. Comedy relied on actual jokes and payoff instead of stupid, gross-out humor. The goal of filmmakers was to make great movies, not to make something that would sell the maximum number of action figures in China. In the golden age of Hollywood, it was acceptable to base stories around archetypal characters without pissing off a bunch of social justice warriors. In fact, the main character of the movie, Rick Dalton, is none other than a Hollywood actor who exclusively plays archetypal characters. This movie focuses so much on celebrating the golden age of Hollywood that it barely even has a story. Now, for some, this might be too self-indulgent. I've criticized Quentin Tarantino already for doing stuff like this in his other movies, but in this movie, I absolutely loved it. Rick Dalton and Cliff Booth are great characters who embody a sort of American masculinity that used to exist but ended around the same time the golden age of Hollywood did. It's entertaining to just see these characters hang out together, to see Cliff Booth drive around Los Angeles and then feed his dog dog food. There's a very lengthy scene where Rick Dalton plays the part of a archetypal Western villain type character. This scene has nothing to do with anything else in the movie. It's just in there to celebrate really great acting. And Leonardo DiCaprio's performance during this part of the movie is absolutely fantastic. Quentin Tarantino includes this scene in the movie to celebrate great acting, great archetypal characters, the greatness of the golden age of Hollywood. And if you wanted to celebrate the golden age of Hollywood, I could think of no greater antagonist than a bunch of dirty hippies. It was the hippie counterculture, after all, that ended the golden age of Hollywood. It's this counterculture that destroyed our culture and replaced it with a cynical anti-culture. After the hippie counterculture became ascendant, you didn't have movies like this anymore. You didn't have archetypal characters, you had cynical characters, you had stupid gross out movies. Hollywood became a shell of its former self. That's what makes this movie so satisfying, is that the hippies get the comeuppance that they deserved. In this movie, the hippies aren't the ones who win, they lose. The movie leaves open the prospect that perhaps the golden age of Hollywood, at least in this movie's universe, wouldn't end in the late 1960s. Perhaps it would continue. In this way, I think that Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is, in some respects, a very conservative movie. It's a movie that celebrates the lost American culture that existed before the late 1960s counterculture destroyed it. It's both surprising and not surprising that the movie was written and directed by Quentin Tarantino. You wouldn't expect Quentin Tarantino to make a movie as conservative as this, given his proclivity towards social justice warrior issues. But on the other hand, Quentin Tarantino is clearly someone who has a love of films. He loves classic films, he loves westerns, he loves stylized filmmaking, and therefore it's not at all surprising that he, more than perhaps most, would appreciate the golden age of Hollywood and appreciate the type of care that went into making movies back then. We may never again ever be in a position where Americans can make movies informed by American culture with an expected American audience. Now, am I overanalyzing things? Am I just looking at this movie and prescribing my own sort of political commentary to it? And maybe I'm wrong about all this, but it seems to me like the movie is trying to hit you over the head with it. I mean, the principal setback of the movie is that Rick Dalton is forced to leave Hollywood and briefly go make movies in Italy. I interpret that as a direct dig at the more globalized Hollywood that replaced the Golden Age era. I think in addition to its celebration of the Golden Age of Hollywood, there's also a meta-narrative to the movie as well. Right now, we're experiencing tectonic shifts when it comes to movie making and how contemporary Hollywood works. With all of these Marvel movies and Disney increasingly trying to monopolize Hollywood, as well as the development of all of these movie streaming services, you've got an end to an era. Now, contemporary Hollywood is not something I would celebrate to the extent that perhaps the golden age of Hollywood should be celebrated, but I do believe that every once in a while it manages to produce a good artistic film. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is one of them, and Joker was one of them as well. But given the changes that are going on right now, I'm not so certain we're going to get very many hits anymore. I mean, just look at the Red Letter Media video of Rich Evans watching movie trailers for movies coming out this year.
There's a pink ball! Let's go! I'm going to give you 5 seconds. I'm curious how this all works.
One thing that I think is certainly going to change is you're not going to see mega actors anymore. No one's going to have the stature of Leonardo DiCaprio or Brad Pitt. In a Disney monopolized marketplace, there's no longer going to be such a thing as the Hollywood megastar. Like Rick Dalton and Cliff Booth, Leonardo DiCaprio and Brad Pitt are starting to get old. It looks increasingly like their best days as movie stars are likely behind them, and that there's really not going to be anyone that's going to take their place. In this way, the film also sort of celebrates the end to a contemporary Hollywood, even though contemporary Hollywood never really lived up to the golden age. Anyways, that's all I have to say about this movie. If you're not already subscribed to my channel, please subscribe.